I think that in these arguments, we're all getting a good part of it, but there is some place that I think we need to start with that you guys aren't mentioning in your argument. So if you've got your book, pull it out in your packet, or if you have an actual book, the page numbers will be the same. There is a central assumption that we make about race in this country, and that we make about race as a human species, that Ta-Nehisi Coates starts his book contrasting. What's the word I want to say? He takes it down. So this is on page 7 of his book. He says this phrase. In fact, I think I will use just a blank Word doc to type notes as we go so that you can see this. He says this phrase, but race is the child of racism, not the father. Okay, a couple people are trying to join our class. All right, there we go. So he says this line on page 7, but race is the child of racism, not the father. And I think this is a really important thing to understand about the way that Ta-Nehisi Coates is envisioning race. So what does that line mean? Raise your hand if you can tell me what that line actually means. Nathan?
I feel like it's kind of saying that, like, because usually a father figure is more authoritative and more like that's going to be the thing, like the child doesn't keep the father in check, it's the other way around. So I think it's saying like racism is the like authoritative, like overpowering figure over race, rather than race being an over, like, does that make sense?
Yeah, it kind of does.
Overpowering, that's the word I was looking for.
Okay, so racism is the overpowering figure over race, so that we understand racism is kind of like in control of race. Okay, cool. Anyone else have anything to add to that about what this sentence could mean? Race is the child of racism, not the father.
I kind of think he's saying that like race comes from racism instead of the other way around. And so if racism like wasn't a problem, then people wouldn't care about race.
Yeah, and he goes even further than that. If racism wasn't a problem, there would be no race. I'm gonna write that down. Problem, if racism didn't exist, there would be no such thing as race. So he is talking about this in terms of like what births something else, right? So if racism is the thing that birthed race, if racism didn't exist, if we didn't have this desire to categorize people based on the tone of their skin, then there would be no such thing as race. Does that make sense? So like right now we categorize people like predominantly we categorize people by the color of their skin, right? And in the United States, that works differently than it does in other countries. Like for example, in South Africa, they have 3 races. They have black, they have white, and then they have another race called colored, which in our country is a racial derogatory term. In Africa, it's not. And this is in South Africa. Sorry, I don't know if I said that. In South Africa, that is not a derogatory term. And every person in South Africa has to fit into one of those 3 categories. So that what ends up happening is that if you are Chinese and live in South Africa, you end up getting categorized as colored. If you're Indian and you live in South Africa, you're also categorized as colored. If you're Japanese and live in South Africa, you're categorized as white. So it's all just dependent on your ideas of how to categorize people. It's just dependent on racism, right? We could have just as easily have categorized people by hair color. Maybe not just as easily. I don't want to say that. That's not true. But we could have categorized people that way, right? So like the blonde people, they're over here. The brown-haired people, they're over here. I guess those are called brunettes. And then the redheads, they're obviously, you know, on the bottom of the hierarchy, right? Just kidding. But we could have, I mean, there could have been a system in place to categorize people that way. In South Africa, again, if your parents, let's say your parents are both categorized as black, and they do this, they used to do this on the level of the government, so that you would register as Black, because their entire system of segregation was based on race. So if both of your parents were Black, but they have a child that is kind of lighter skinned, they could take that child to the government authorities and say, look, our child is no longer Black, our child is either white or colored or something like that. And they would base it on the actual tone of their skin and say, okay, then you are now in this category. And that was fluid. It could go back and forth at any time. In the United States, we've decided that, if you are maybe 1/8 African American, 1/16 African American, then you're pretty much categorized as Black. We've decided that even just one ancestor that's Black carries through, but that was an arbitrary choice. That's the point here. That is not based on anything genetic. It's not based on anything scientific. It was just an arbitrary choice to divide people that way. So if we hadn't had the desire to divide people, we would never have a concept called race. Does that make sense? That's what Coates is arguing. What do you think?
I do have a question with that.
Mm-hmm.
So what about people like Eminem or Logic who have Black parents but they are white?
Eminem has Black parents?
Yeah, well, he's biracial.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Eminem and Logic are both biracial, but they both have white skin.
Yeah, what Ta-Nehisi Coates would probably talk about, I don't know that I've ever read him talking about passing. There is a concept, though, that's been, a truth of American history, which is that some people will kind of have a privilege of being born with a lighter skin, and then they can pass as another race. These days we're actually seeing people weirdly pass the other direction with people like Rachel Dolezal, or I just saw in the news there was a woman who was trying to pass as Latina, even though she never had any ancestry that was from Mexico. So there's these ways of passing in our culture, but you would have to disavow your entire ancestry to do so, right? You'd have to. And I don't know that Eminem does that, even though I don't really know what his race is. Yeah. But the point is, go ahead.
I'm not saying he does that. I'm just saying how does the world view them in other places? Because they say it's race, which is based off of who you are, where you're from.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's really based off of the color of your skin.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I get that. So you're saying that maybe things in America are not that much different from things in South Africa if when you are born, you look different than your parents? Yeah. I really only know South Africa in terms of race. I don't know a lot of other places, but I think the difference is in America, it's a cultural understanding that people look at you and say, oh, that person is Chinese, or, oh, that person is white. Or in South Africa, it was a government restriction, but I think his point here is that you're not those things, really. Not really. It's just a way of categorizing you, right? But then people get a little bit kind of tripped up on what his argument is, because, here, I'm going to stop the share here for a second, because later on in the book, he starts talking about kind of the value of an African-American experience, right? So go to page 42 of your book. And here's how he starts to reconcile what seems like a contradiction. He's saying that race is imaginary, right? But he's saying that now that it exists in terms of people accept that it is true, you can't just pretend that it's not real and that it doesn't create differences between us, right? So on page 42, the first full paragraph, he says, "The Black world was expanding before me, and I could see now that the world was more than a photo negative of that of the people who believed they are white. White America is a syndicate arrayed to protect its exclusive power to dominate and control our bodies. Sometimes this power is direct, lynching, and sometimes it is insidious, redlining. But however it appears, the power of domination and exclusion is central to the belief in being white, and without it, white people would cease to exist for want of reasons. There will surely always be people with straight hair and blue eyes, as there have been for all history, but some of these straight-haired people with blue eyes have been Black, And this points to the great difference between their world and ours. We did not choose our fences. So how would you respond? So let's do it this way. Let's hear this argument. Let's say you hear this argument that race is imaginary, that it's not based on any sort of like scientific differences between us, right? And you say to Ta-Nehisi Coates, okay, well then that means that the best way forward would be to be colorblind, right? To not recognize race, to stop talking about it, to stop pretending that it is so all controlling of people's lives, and instead to move on from that. How would Ta-Nehisi Coates respond to you, do you think? If you asked Ta-Nehisi Coates, if you told him the solution is colorblindness, how would he respond?
He would probably disagree. He's like, it's already ingrained in the system and now we have to kind of embrace it.
Yeah, exactly. You can't like turn back time, right? You can't turn back time and say, well, racial differences existed in the past, but now we are colorblind and so it's all good, right? He would say like, absolutely not. You gave people an inheritance and so now you have to kind of deal with the consequences of that. Nathan?
I also think he would disagree. I think very similar to what Sam said, where he said it, it's engraved in the system. I also think that like it's you can't just decide, okay, as America we're going to move forward and be colorblind, because there's still going to be that greed and that pride and that racism and the people who decide that they are going to be racist, because like you can't collectively decide just to move on from that. I think it's also similar because a lot of people are saying that we should move on from slavery, which I think is like a terrible thing to say, because I don't think we ever can move on from that, because first of all, like it's still happening, and second of all, it's like it's something awful that's like what America was built on. So like I think those two kind of go hand in hand with the fact that you can't just say, okay, it's done, let's move on, because it's never really going to be done.
Yeah, I think that would definitely be his answer, especially that emphasis on that word never. It's never going to be over. Like you can't, when you've had something as soul crushing, not just of an individual person, but of a group of people. And then you say to that group of people, like, but that wasn't you that experienced that. That was your great great grandpa. So let's move on from that. You're trying to sweep under the rug the history of racism completely, right? And the fact that there was an existence of race in the country. And I think that, who was it? Christiane in the chat box said, and it's not fair to leave it in the dark. I think that's a huge part of it, because if you're saying let's be colorblind and see everyone as people, of course we should see everyone as people, right? But to try and not see race, what you're trying to do is say that then I wish we could just be all equal. I think that's the impetus behind that statement, is like, I just wish that we could see each other as equals, right? But what Christiane says by this idea of it being not fair to do that, it's a kind of irony, an irony that we can't escape. So there's a line on page 69, and this kind of speaks to what Nathan was saying. This is the paragraph that starts, that wisdom is not unique. I'm going to read it, you can find it. That wisdom is not unique to our people, but I think it has special meaning to those of us born out of mass rape, whose ancestors were carried off and divided up into policies and stocks. I have raised to respect every human being as singular, and you must extend that same respect into the past. And then he goes on to talk about how slavery was not just an indefinable mass of flesh, but it was like one woman. Like, think about slavery in terms of like the effect it could have on one body, and how that body kind of has kids, and what that will do to their bodies, and so on and so forth. And so he's kind of trying to straddle that line between seeing things as individuals and the way that the individual can have power, but acknowledging the predominance of history at the same time. So he's saying, see the people in history as individuals as well. And if you see those people in history as individuals, then you have to get away from this idea that those individuals could just give up this horrible thing that happened to them. I think that kind of makes sense. So I think like some people get confused when he talks about like Black bodies are beautiful, you know, we have you know, this rich culture, and he talks about that a lot throughout the book, because they're like, yeah, but if race is not real, why would he talk about Black bodies being beautiful? And the answer is that race is real, but it is real because we imagined it. Does that make sense? Kinda? Okay, cool. So the other part of the argument that I want to focus on here, that was in that part that I read you on 42. So he's talking about in that one how Black culture is not just a photo negative of white culture, right? But then later on he says that without this idea of, without a belief in being white people would cease to exist for want of reasons. And he says this a few times in the book. He's like, he makes fun of things like ice cream socials or white suburban picket fences, you know? And he's saying that like, there is such a thing as Black culture because it was invented. There is no such thing as white culture. That's his argument. So explain to me why he can say that, according to him. Like, you don't have to agree or disagree, but just like according to him, why can he say that?
He can say that because in his mind, probably everything that the white culture does is from other cultures.
Okay, so it's about appropriation then.
Yeah, in my mind, he would say that we are very unoriginal and we just take what we like and leave what we don't.
Okay, and I do think he says that a couple times. He talks about appropriation and how when it is convenient to, in a social hierarchy, to borrow from the bottom, then it works just fine to do so. He also, though, talks about, if he talks about how Black culture is imagined, or not culture, Black race is imagined, and that created Black culture, he's also talking about how the white race is imagined then, right? So look on page 55. At the bottom of the paragraph on 55, it says, perhaps the Irish too had once lost their bodies. Perhaps being named Black had nothing to do with any of this. Perhaps being named Black was just someone's name for being at the bottom. A human turned to object, object turned to pariah. He talks about this a few times in the book. He is talking about how race is also fluid. So not fluid in one person, not where one person like a do you guys know who I mean when I say Rachel Dolezal? Is she still somebody we talk about? Not really. She was a woman from like, I want to say like 6 or 7 years ago, a white woman who had been kind of pretending to be Black, like identifying as Black for a number of years. And she was like running like the NAACP like chapter in her neighborhood, even though she was white and she had like dreadlocks, and it was a big controversy at the time. It'd be interesting if you wanted to look it up. But he's not talking about an individual changing. He's talking about groups of people being designated in different ways, right? So there was one point in our culture where Irish people were not white. And there was a point in American history where Italians were not white. But now Irish people and Italians are white, right? And Ta-Nehisi Coates is talking about how the majority will adopt certain people to maintain their majority. So like if we still didn't consider Irish, people with Irish ancestry or Italian ancestry as white, then white people would not be in the majority, right? And so it's like this way of maintaining a power structure, the fluid race. Yeah, Nathan.
That got me thinking. I think that's, which I'm sure this is what you're saying. I think in his view, he's basically saying, like, he's not saying that, like, as a people, because I actually had a talk with my friend about this a few weeks ago. He's not saying, like, because, you know, I heard that argument from some other people too, saying, you know, like, white people do not really have a culture. And at first, I disagreed, and then they explained it, and I realized they're not saying that because white people don't have a culture, because white is just this group of races. Like, white is a group of European, Irish, French, British. So, like, there's no such thing as white cultures. There's such thing as European culture or Irish culture or, you know, that stuff. But I think what he's saying is, like, as this group of races, we don't really have a like collective culture, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it does. The only thing that that group shares is their position of power, their privilege, right? And so he's saying that like privilege on its own is not a culture. Yeah. So the things that he cites as being like white culture are basically just privileged culture. Like when he's talking about ice cream socials and picket fence, it's not that other groups wouldn't want ice cream or whatever. It's a way of designating people who have privilege versus who don't have privilege, if that makes sense. And he's also saying then that at the bottom, people can be kind of grouped into that section as well. But in American history, we are unique because that was codified and that was made into policy through a system of slavery. So that there's not much, adopting into the bottom of the hierarchy, if that makes sense. Okay. There's another thing I want to point out about his argument before we move on. What time do we get out of here? 12:55. Okay, we have plenty of time. All right, the other part that can be kind of confusing is his ideas about democracy. So go to page 6. And he says this line: Americans deify democracy in a way that allows for a dim awareness that they have, from time to time, stood in defiance of their God. But democracy is a forgiving God, and America's heresies, torture, theft, enslavement, are so common among individuals and nations that none can declare themselves immune. So what is he saying there about democracy? It's his argument. When he says Americans deify democracy, does that have a positive connotation or a negative connotation? Cooper?
How's my audio? Sometimes it's really good and sometimes it's just crap.
It's kind of like so. What happens if you turn off your camera and talk?
Okay. Is this any better?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's meaning that in a negative connotation, saying it's almost a double-bladed sword. So sometimes it'll be good for some things, it'll be good for progressing, but at the same time, democracy has been at the hand of so many atrocities and so many wrongful things that it really it can be either a great thing or it can be mob rule that'll destroy everything.
Okay, good. So it's like democracy itself. Well, I'm hearing two things in your comment, because on the one hand, you're saying democracy should work, but there's dangers to it, right? But on the other hand, you're saying that if democracy is a majority rules, then it is at the mercy of the majority, right? Okay, and I think that's kind of what he is saying in that section. He's talking about how we tend, when you deify something, you see it as divine, right? You see it as infallible. It is perfect. And yet what he's saying is it's not that democracy has been imperfectly applied. It is that democracy is not perfect because of this idea that the majority can rule. And we saw this in, I think it was Thoreau, right? Yeah, it was Thoreau that was talking about how democracy isn't inherently moral because because the majority is not inherently moral. And that's why you're supposed to follow your own whim. That's kind of the same idea here. And so when he talks about the founding fathers in this book, I can't find the page right now, but when he's talking about the founding fathers, he's not saying that they like set up this great system and that every once in a while people just disobeyed it or applied it wrongly. What he's saying is they set up a racist system on purpose. And he's like, you shouldn't deify democracy, you shouldn't deify the founders, because their whole system was built on subjugating one person. So when I talked about how he was being controversial, that's one of the ways he's being controversial, right? Like when we talk about our country, we often talk about it in terms of American exceptionalism. You know, America's the best country. It's got the best system. Yeah, we did some things wrong, you know, genocide, slavery, you know, but ultimately America's, you know, so great, right? Those were just mistakes by people. But what Coates is saying is like, that is what built America. That's what America is built on, the reason that we are where we are now. And he talks about this in terms of the American dream. So that's on page 10. He says, when the journalist asked me about my body, it was like she was asking me to awaken her from the most gorgeous dream. I have seen that dream all my life. It is perfect houses with nice lawns. It is Memorial Day cookouts, block associations, and driveways. The dream is tree houses and the Cub Scouts. The dream smells like peppermint but tastes like strawberry shortcake. And for so long, I have wanted to escape into the dream, to fold my country over my head like a blanket. But this has never been an option because the dream rests on our backs, the bedding made from our bodies. And knowing this, knowing that the dream persists by warring with the known world, I was sad for the host. I was sad for all those families. I was sad for my country. But above all, in that moment, I was sad for you. And this is him talking about his son, right? I don't know who that is. Remove. I'm not going to let someone take over our class. Okay, so in that moment, he's talking about, he says the dream and he capitalizes the dream. So he's talking about the American dream, and that's why he capitalizes it like that. What do you think his attitude is? Actually, how about everybody in the chat box, tell me what his tone is towards the American dream. Think of a tone word that you can say. How does he feel about the American dream? Very pessimistic, okay. Unrealistic. Wistful, just out of touch, resentful, critical, shameful. These are good words. Cynical. It's non-inclusive, yes. All right, good. I think that partly we get that from one line that I find extremely powerful in this text. He says, the dream rests on our backs, the bedding made from our bodies. I'm gonna write that down. The dream rests on our backs, the bedding made from our bodies. Hang on, sorry. Don't have the tech as smooth as I want. There it is. All right. All right, let's look at that quotation a little bit. There's some metaphors going on there, right? Why do you think I would say that this is such a powerful sentence? Why are the metaphors really applicable for what he is talking about in this moment of the text?
I would say he's kind of saying how they can't enjoy the American dream that everyone else is living because like it's from their suffering or like their ancestors suffering and they can't enjoy it, I guess. I don't know how to. Oh,
yeah, so maybe every time you think of an American dream, or what are you getting some kind of food? Sam?
I'm getting tested right now.
Oh no, I'm sorry. That's not as fun as Taco Bell or whatever I thought it was.
Oh, I'm going to get in and out after this, so it's okay.
Okay, good. Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, no, but I got contact traced November 9th, and they just barely emailed me today saying that I need to get tested.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, I hope you're okay. All right, so yeah, it's like when it was your grandparents then that experienced something horrible, you're not going to be able to enjoy whatever, like, you know, middle-class life comes from it, okay? Why else would this be a really powerful metaphor? Why do you think it's significant that it says the dream rests on our backs? Oh, Christiane.
So I think it's interesting that he says the bedding made from our bodies, because when you dream, you're asleep, and typically when you sleep, you're in a bed. And so I feel like it's just this thing that they have to deal with. They're the comfort of the American dream. They're like a safety net.
Okay, good. So that by having a race on the bottom of a hierarchy, then that creates a safety net for one person or one group of people, maybe. But that safety net is actually made out another group, right? So this kind of, it's kind of a idea that capitalists will use. How do I want to put this? Normally I draw this. So like pretend you've got like a circle, right? A pie here. Some people make the argument that if you could have a whole pie, or someone could have a chunk of that pie and you only get a little bit of that pie, right? But what that assumes is that there is a finite amount of pie, and that means that if you want to have as much pie as possible, you're going to fight against whoever is after your pie, even if it's just one little sliver of pie. Does that make sense? That's not necessarily a sound economic model. Like we don't really run out of resources in that way, but that's the attitude we're using when we try to, when it's this idea of building your dream off somebody else. Okay, down here, Cooper in the chat box said, because it was built on their backs, it's literally built off of them. And I think that is what is really important here. The idea of being bent over so that someone can build something on your back is a reference to slavery. This is a reference to people working in the fields in order to build up economic prosperity for a country, right? This is kind of what Frederick Douglass was talking about too, when he was like, just because you're a northerner doesn't mean that you are escaping from the the benefits of living under a system that allows slavery in at least one part of your country, right? Because you're still buying cotton, you're still participating in all the economic activities that down in the South they rely on slaves for. So stuff would come up from the South, they'd trade, northerners would get it for cheaper because slaves existed, right? And so here he's talking about how the American dream, literally the idea that you can work really hard to get what you want, literally is built on slave labor. And that's why I find the word bedding extremely important here. Why do you think it's important that he says the bedding is made from our bodies? You can write it in the chat box if you want to. Because it's that idea of comfort, yes, but what's bedding made out of? Sheets and so on. Yeah, it's made out of cotton, Race, exactly. So it's a literal reference to slavery and the cotton fields. So the fact that slave labor built the prosperity of the country is what he's saying there. And so he really resists. I don't know that resist is the right word. And he was actually kind of not struggling with it in the interview, but he was like being really careful with the language in the PBS interview, and he was talking about personal responsibility. It's not like he's saying that someone couldn't achieve success. If he were to say that, it would be pretty disingenuous because he achieved success. He's very wealthy now, Ta-Nehisi Coates. He lives in a super nice apartment in New York, like he travels a lot, etc. But what he's saying is that no matter what, he's still going to be a Black man. And he's still going to have that particular set of stereotypes and set of expectations placed on his back. And so that he'll never reach the dream in the way that somebody else would. Does that make sense? So yeah, he's being really pessimistic. I think the person who put pessimistic, who put cynical, who put bitter, like you guys are spot on. So does he have any answers for how to solve this problem? I'm putting so many quotations around this. What does he say is the answer for his son? Any ideas? It comes kind of early, actually, in the book. Look on page 12. He says, I tell you now that the question of how one should live within a Black body, within a country lost in the dream, is the question of my life. And the pursuit of this question, I have found, ultimately answers itself. And then look a little bit down the page. It says, I have searched for answers in nationalist myth, in classrooms, out on the streets, and on other continents. The question is unanswerable, which is not to say futile. The greatest reward of this constant interrogation, of confrontation with the brutality of my country, is that it has freed me from ghosts and girded me against the sheer terror of disembodiment. All right, so you're on page 12 for this, right? I am going to send you into breakout groups. Since I've been talking for so long, I'm going to send you into breakout groups, and you are going to talk for 3 minutes again about what he means by this idea that the question is unanswerable, which is not to say futile. Okay, do you understand what you're going to be doing? Not quite. Let me say it again. You are talking in your breakout groups about page 12, and you guys are going to say what he means by the question is unanswerable, which is not to say futile. Another way, I have such a hard time saying that, futile. Another way of thinking about this is, okay, if these are all the problems that America has, what's his solution? And you guys talk amongst yourself about what he would say the solution is. Okay, I'm going to put you into these breakout rooms. If you have questions, call me over. You can ask like a question and I'll see it and I'll come into the room. Okay, go ahead. 3 minutes. I don't know why sometimes it doesn't assign some of you guys, so I'm going to put Isaac in breakout room 3, Christiane in breakout room 3, and Sam in 1. Okay, so if you're watching the recording, it's awkward now. I'm just going to be sitting here for 3 minutes. So you guys just scroll ahead because I'm not going to upload multiple videos. Sarah, you're very animated. I like it. She's listening to music. Hello. Lily, you're also very animated. It's fun to watch. Okay. All right. So if you were the person that was designated to talk about your ideas from your group, I'm just going to, first of all, I want to hear from maybe the second group. This was the group with Luke, Sarah, or Tate. What were you guys talking about in your group?
We just kind of said how, because I didn't know what the word futile meant, so I looked it up and it just said incapable of producing any useful result or pointless. So then I kind of just read it as the question is unanswerable, which is not to say pointless.
Yeah.
I think I interpreted it as, or we, as a group, we did that he truly doesn't have an answer for yet, and no one really does, but sometime eventually someone will figure out an answer and it'll like just fix it.
Okay, so it might be something like looking towards the future and hoping that things get better, right? Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to go to group 5 then. This is the group with Allie, Cooper, Emmeline, and Tiana. What did you guys think he was saying about the solution, if there is one?
Well, we didn't really talk a bunch about that. We just figured out what he meant where he says that it's unanswerable, but not to say futile.
Yeah.
Um,
So what did you guys say about that?
we said that it basically means even though he can't or doesn't know if he will ever be able to answer this question, that doesn't mean that it's not a good question to ask and to like think about. So that's what we said.
Yes, that is his answer. His answer is that there is no answer, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't stop asking the question about, basically, don't stop asking about why inequality exists, about how it operates. Don't stop asking about why one group benefits off another group. Like, don't ever stop asking those questions as long as they exist. And since he is, you know, he would admit this, a real pessimist about it, he's saying it's always going to exist. So if you, and this is a book written to his Black son, right? So he's like, if you are a Black boy in America, you can't stop asking these questions. Now, why do you think that'd be really important for him to convey to his son in particular? What investment does he have in this argument?
If once his son loses like faith in a cause, like that's like how all like revolutions and like different opinions have been through all the world. Like once people lose faith, like that's when it's over.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we've been talking about like the power of rhetoric through this civil rights movement. And I mentioned to you that the reason that I choose the civil rights movement as a way to talk about the power of rhetoric is it is one of the few cultural movements that we have had that have been very successful. Even though Ta-Nehisi Coates is writing in this book in 2015 and talking about the ways that it hasn't been successful, there have been demonstrable effects, right? Without the civil rights movement, you wouldn't have equal housing, you wouldn't have, you know, anti-discrimination laws, you wouldn't have a Black president. Like, there have been movements made through rhetoric. And what's interesting about this book, it won, I think I mentioned this, it won like all the awards, right? And it didn't start a conversation, but it solidified a conversation. And people now cite this thing in almost all the essays I read about Black Lives Matter. They've cited Ta-Nehisi Coates in that essay. So there's some kind of power here. He would never say that his book can change minds, but he would say that his book is causing people to ask questions, and especially his son. So when we talk about audiences, he is very clear that his audience is not white people in this book. That's what he says. He says, no, I'm not writing this for white people. I'm writing this for Black kids who have to experience the world that says that if they work really hard, they can achieve the American dream. And he's cynical about that. And so he wants to convey it's strange. It's kind of this backwards kind of hope. If you go into life thinking that the harder you work, the more success you will get, and then you don't achieve success, even though you work hard, that could be crushing, right? But if you go into life knowing that there is a system stacked against you, but you can work hard to find the answers for yourself, there's a kind of optimism there too. Okay, so here's what I want to do, and I know there's like different opinions on all of this stuff. What I want to do is I want you to watch one more video. So this is the second video on the Canvas page. It's the Late Night with Stephen Colbert video. So we can have like fun here at the end of class. Okay, so pull up that second video. It is 7 minutes long again. So I'm going to mute myself while you guys watch that for 7 minutes. Will you give me a thumbs up if you heard me and you know what you're doing? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna mute myself while we watch this. Okay, I'm done with the video. Are you done with the video? Okay. So just to finish things up here, what do you think of this tactic that he's talking about in that video? So he is talking about how it is not his place to offer hope to people, that he sees himself as a writer, maybe we could even say a rhetorician, right? As somebody who doesn't have to offer hope to people. What do you think about that rhetorical choice that he made then, to be cynical in his argument or to be pessimistic? Nathan?
By choosing to say that he's not the person who gives, like, who's supposed to give hope, that reinforces kind of his whole argument, because his whole argument, like, at least especially what my group talked about, is that, like, America is a racist country and things might change, but if they do, it's not going to happen for a long time, so we shouldn't count on it. So I think if he was trying to be the person to offer hope, then he wouldn't be able to express his true feelings. He wouldn't be able to reinforce his argument. It would just counteract everything that he currently stands for and writes about.
Okay, good. Yeah, if he were to be able to say that things can get better, then he maybe needs to take a different position on what he thinks about how race divides people, right? Or racism divides people. What else do you guys think? So here's what my conflict is, right? Like, one of my favorite rhetoricians is Barack Obama. I think he has amazing speeches. I remember watching his Democratic convention speech when he was a senator and just being like blown away by his style of rhetoric. His whole deal is hope, right? Like hope and change, hope and change. He said it a million times. But here's Ta-Nehisi Coates coming in with like, all you can do is ask questions. Nothing is going to be solved. Good luck out there, kid, right? So when is one's tactic appropriate, and or when is the other tactic appropriate? Like, in what situations is hope appropriate, do you think?
When he like knows it could potentially happen within like a short amount of time. Like,
Okay.
don't give any false hope to anyone.
All right, good. So part of it is about like maybe what your position is and how you could lead a country. So like it would be appropriate for somebody like Obama to have this idea of hope and change because he's hoping that within a couple years things might actually change. Whereas Ta-Nehisi Coates is not in that kind of position of power. It's a question to think about. I was listening to an NPR article once where this guy was talking about his book on global warming. And he said that a lot of global warming books that he had read were all about the things that we can do to change, the situation that our world is going in, right? So like drive less or companies offer incentives to work from home or whatever. And he was saying that rhetoric did not work on him because to him it was like, okay, well, cool, everybody else does that, the world will be fine, I can escape personal responsibility, right? So there's like a rhetorical purpose to cynicism sometimes, to make people feel hopeless on purpose. Let me read what Cooper said here. This is going to sound very cynical, but too often we're told to look on the bright side. And then because of that, we completely ignore some of these things that need addressing. Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what I'm saying here. Hope is necessary, but it could be wrong altogether if we rely on hope, not actual work and change. Yeah. And in this instance, he's not saying that his son needs to work and change in any significant way. He just has to change his mind frame or he's going to be kind of thrown into hopelessness, right? And if your choice is between being neutral about something or angry about something but feeling hopeless, I'd go with the anger rather than the hopelessness, as a form of like, making sure my own head was okay. I think that's part of what he's talking about. Okay, so let's talk about where class is going from here. You have one more rhetorical analysis to write. It's about this book, Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. On the schedule, I wrote 4 to 5 pages. I meant 3 to 4. So it's 3 to 4 pages. The assignment is on Canvas. It's not due until after Thanksgiving. So you've got a little while to work on this one. For you guys, it's due November 30th. And then next week, we are going to start a kind of a new unit. We're doing a little sliver of talking about satire for a minute. So we'll watch a bunch of SNL clips and like, it'll be a fun day on Monday. We'll do a bunch of definitions too. So we'll do a little thing with satire, but then we move right into argument writing. So we're almost done with analysis. So now is your chance, like in the next coming days, if you still feel totally lost, to reach out to me so that I can help you out one-on-one, because we're going to kind of move on from this point. We'll still be talking about it, obviously, but like you're not going to have to write more rhetorical analysis papers until the end of the year when we are studying for the exam. Let me see. Oh, okay. So at the last thing you're going to do for this unit then on civil rights, the reason I showed you this clip is because it kind of transitions nicely into our first central question, which was about how powerful this kind of rhetoric is. So I'm having you read 3 contemporary pieces of writing on the Black Lives Matter movement. You are going to choose them. You're going to find what you think could be a significant essay. And there's a worksheet that you fill out where it's basically you're just doing a lit review, where you're telling me what their argument was and whether or not you think it is effective. So it's you kind of going out into the world and doing your own research now and applying what we've been learning about the power of rhetoric, and specifically in a civil rights movement, and thinking about how rhetoric is working then right now in our country, because we're still having this conversation maybe more than ever. Not more than ever, but more now than in the last 30 years or so. Okay, I think that wraps it up on business. Oh, you do not need to post anything on the Canvas page today. I have taken roll, and so I know who was here and who wasn't, and so you don't need to worry about that. And get your annotations in by tonight, because there's no late work on this one for the Ta-Nehisi Coates stuff. Okay, let me know what questions do you have, because that was a lot of business to throw at you at the end of class here.
When is like the little essay thing on the Between the World and Me Do, like the 1 to 2 page one?
That one is your informal response. So that's
Yeah.
where you're just telling me sort of like what you thought about it. Lots of personal pronouns. I'm applying this stuff to my life in this way, or I hated this part, or this part really stuck with me, that kind of a response.
Is that due tonight too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the one I meant to have it due this morning, but I messed up, so it's due by tonight. So. Any other questions?
Do we have anything due for next class?
For next class, that's when the Black Lives Matter lit review is due. Emmeline?
So is there a place that you recommend us to start looking for these essays, or just yeah?
I gave you some ideas in the assignment description. And I told you it needs to be, either from a famous author or a famous publication. The places that I would go might be different than the places you would go because of our politics or whatever, but I would look in the New York Times and the New Yorker, the Atlantic, Salon. Those are some big ones that I would check first, and you would find plenty of stuff in those. Any other questions? Where do we find the BLM lit review? Okay, I thought I posted it to Canvas. Let me make sure I posted it. Yes, it's posted under the Friday, how we have that online Friday module. It says online Friday, November 20th. It's posted there, and then it's posted under the module for next class. It says homework, Black Lives Matter lit review. Yes, Nathan, why don't you stay around? That sounds good. Okay, if you don't have any more questions, you can take off. I will see you on Monday. I will make sure I post that then, Luke. I'm sorry about that. I will. I probably didn't post it. There we go. It's on there now. I just didn't post the module. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. So I emailed you because a lot of when I read through it, I didn't realize that we had a physical copy in the book. I completely forgot that annotations were a thing. So I was like, okay, I'll listen to an audiobook. When I do stuff, I'll follow online on a PDF and stuff just to,
Cool.
to make sure. So I do not have annotations. So do you want me to skim through it? I still have like 20 pages at the end. I could really annotate. Like I'm really
Why
sorry,
don't
but
you-
it's
It's not a big deal. Why don't you annotate the last 20 pages so that I know you finished it? And then I could tell from our conversation today that you had done the reading, and that's mostly what I use the annotations for. So you'll be good there.
Thank you.
Yeah, the only thing is it might be a little bit harder for you to do the rhetorical analysis.
That's yeah. So I might skim through on my own time anyways, but just for the assignment, I was wondering.
Yeah, I have like a lot of little post-it notes of places that I think are really powerful. So if you get stuck and you're like, oh, I can't remember where this was, go ahead and email me. I can help you out.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Nathan.